Live.
And we are live now. Don't get nervous, guys. This is going to be intense. So today we have a very special treat for you. There was about 2 weeks ago now at this point, a Capturing Christianity weekend conference was it Houston, Texas? Is that where the conference was held?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 5 first-rate theologians, first-rate Christian apologists from on Twitter and YouTube. You might even know some of them because they're pretty darn well-known in these parts. And they were at the conference, and they're going to give us, we're going to talk about the conference and what they thought about it and give us their insights into what happened and how it was seeing everybody in person and all sorts of different stuff. So to start us off, we're going to have everybody go around. Some of these people are new to my channel. Introduce yourself. Just tell us who you are and what you do on YouTube and what you're. I'm pretty sure you all have YouTube channels, except Mike. Do you have a channel or
Robert?
Or Robert? I apologize.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
So tell us about your channel and what you specialize in, and then just give us one or two, a brief little thing on what you thought the biggest takeaway from the event was. Like, what was the most interesting thing for you, and then with that we will start her off. So, John, you want to start us off?
Sure. My name's John Buck. I've been on the channel a couple times before. I'm sort of the guy running the strings behind the scenes. Sort of
the brains of the organization. I'm the personality. You are the framework. You are the the tech, the undergirding.
Yeah, I'm the person that everyone gets mad at whenever things go wrong.
Right.
Including like right now, there's no name tags, and I'm not sure how to set that up since we're doing StreamYard right now. But anyway, so I'm John Buck. I have a YouTube channel that I don't post anything on, but it does have one video that has like 15,000 views of like T-Jump's biggest blunders. So that's my claim to fame, basically. And I've done a couple of debates. But yeah, I went to the conference. I drove in the Friday night or like Thursday night into Friday morning. Got there just as it was starting and really loved it. Probably my favorite part was getting to talk to a lot of the people that I know from online in person and just jump right into like theological conversations at the drop of a hat. It was a lot of fun.
That's cool. Who wants to go next?
Robert, you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Robert White. Sometimes I go by the Common Sense Epistemologist on Twitter. My website, YouTube. Well, my website is robertlwhite.net. And what I like to focus on personally is a lot of epistemology, but very like practical epistemology. I don't get as much into the technical side, but things like confronting bias on a daily level. When is it okay to appeal to authority? When is that like a helpful heuristic versus like a logical fallacy? Analyzing debates. I mean, yes, John, well done.
I figured it out.
Names, yay.
So yeah, I like to do that sort of thing. I have a YouTube series on like some practical epistemological ideas, and I host dialogues and debates sometimes. I came in, I was there for the whole conference, and I'm actually part of the Bereans, which is like this subgroup, this Facebook group in Capturing Christianity. But to be honest, I'm not super active in there. I wasn't super buddied up with many people in there, but it was so cool to come to this conference. And for me, one of the cool aspects was the Twitter Philosophy of Religion crew, which represents some of the people on here. And we have a photo of that group. And I mean, John and I have interacted for probably a year now. I don't know how long exactly. He sent me some papers that I read of his. And so it was just so cool to actually meet him in real life, which first happened at a Mexican restaurant with like 18 people around a table before the actual conference started out, which was really fun. I mean, I'll say, two things I loved about it. I mean, there's a lot of things I loved about it. One was exactly what John said, just the networking. I mean, just the meeting people and hanging out. Late on Saturday, me, John, and the dry apologist sat there just geeking out. And that's going to be a very special memory for me, just the three of us talking a long time. And then it's slowly bleeding into us moving outside. And we're in a bigger group. And then it was like us talking with Ben Watkins, the atheist who was the debater, and us just all talking to him. And I mean, it was getting close to midnight. Like, it's hard to beat those sort of memories. And just a wide breadth of talks. Like you had ontological technicality, Josh Rasmussen doing his thing, and then you had Lee Strobel with miracles, like full spectrum, and that was really cool. And I just one special thing I really like is how welcoming I think the skeptics that were there felt from what it seemed like, and how it wasn't like, oh, you're here, you're a project for us to witness to. It was like, look, of course we'd love you to become a Christian. Like no one's going to lie, but we also can tell you're a truth seeker and we want to talk about these interesting ideas and be respectful. And we just love geeking out on this stuff. And so it just had a really cool like ethos to it, a really friendly ethos. And that was really special to me.
Who, just out of curiosity, Ben Watkins and what other atheists were there?
Agnostic, Guarded Acumen. I don't know his actual name, but he works with Joe Schmid, I know, who is another agnostic
so
who he could make it.
Crew.
I know his name, but I don't know if he's anonymous.
So yeah, that's just one. But even we had a special video recording of the Cosmic Skeptic apologizing he wasn't able to make it. But you could just tell even in his video, like how friendly he was, and like you know, I think he would have loved to have been there and talking to us, and we would have loved to have talked to him. So, and yeah, I met a few random other skeptics as well in the audience.
That's cool. That's cool. Okay, so who else we got? Square, do you want to go?
Sure. Let's go clockwise, I guess. I'm Apologetics Squared. My head is a square, and I make animated like philosophy of religions videos. And yeah, that's basically my channel. Do I have to say like now what I enjoyed about the conference?
Yeah. Tell us.
Sure.
Tell us what the biggest takeaways for you were.
Oh yeah. So some of the biggest takeaways were like actually getting to interact with some of the speakers there. I really enjoyed talking to them because it's like you have like I like come up with all these ideas, and then it's like, hey, these are like experts that I could bounce my ideas off of. So that was one of the most fun parts for me. And then also just interacting with everybody else was also super fun. So just like interacting with all these people, and yeah, I guess the word networking, we're all gonna say that was super good. Yeah.
So cool. And then of course Santi needs no introduction, but he's going to do it anyways for the sake of the conversation flow. So tell us about, you got 2 channels now, right? Or did you 86.1? And then tell us what you thought of the conference.
Well, I do have 2 channels, but one of them I don't use anymore. That's the original Finding Truth. And then what I did was merge myself with another apologetics ministry called Explain International. Back then it used to be Explain Apologetics. And what we're doing is just basically getting different people from different backgrounds and different expertise. Like some of them are ex-Muslims, people that do textual criticism, New Testament stuff. And we just all got together and basically are trying to provide different resources for people. Our blog is pretty good. Like we usually write about, philosophy, Mormonism, like all kinds of things. So that's basically the channel that I do now, like the one that I use the most, Explain International. The conference, I thought it was really good. It was well organized. I loved the opportunity to, meet different people. Braxton is in the comment section, and I got a chance to speak to him for probably like 30 to 45 minutes or something. I made him basically late for his lunch. Just getting to know you guys, it was really good. Robert, we had a conversation from the restaurant that you were mentioning, the Mexican restaurant, all the way to the place where we were staying. And it was just kind of cool to get to know other individuals that are passionate about these topics, and getting to know some of the speakers, like having conversations with them was like just great. I talked to Trent for a while. Obviously he was really busy, but also open for, you to ask him questions and all that stuff. So that was really good. I thought Brittany, I think that's her name, Cameron's wife, she did an amazing job, like just organizing everything. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Getting to hang out with some of you guys was awesome. The dry apologist, he's not here, but I got a chance to talk to him for a while, and that was really cool. Had lunch together, and that was awesome. Yeah.
That's cool. That's the first time you met John Buck, right? Is this first time you've seen most of these guys in person?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's probably true of all of you. Have you?
Oh yeah. We're all just scattered across the globe.
It was so cool though, like walking around and you'll recognize people that you've seen just from like Twitter profile images, like, oh, that's Santi, or oh, that's Caleb, or Dry Apologist, and
right,
or hearing someone's name too, like you, John. It was like we were at that Mexican restaurant together for like an hour before I knew you were there, even though we had been texting, and because I'd never really seen your face, just like a really kind of far away thing, you know. And I was only at the end, we shook hands, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm Robert," and you're like, "Yeah, I'm John Buck," and I was like, "Oh, John Buck," like you, which was
that's funny.
really
That
cool.
was a big table too. There's
it was literally like 16 or 18 people.
Like 4 different conversations all going on at once.
Yeah. I noticed that just about the photos, because that was what gave me the idea to have this, because I noticed just the photos of like Dry Apologist with Santi, with you. I've never seen you guys together, and then seeing you all lined up next to each other, like put you in a context that I never like, wow, Dry Apologist is really tall. You know, like it never seen it. It just made everything seem more like these aren't abstractions. Like my wife calls you guys my fake friends from Twitter, and it puts you in the context of like not abstractions but actual people. So go ahead, John. What were you going to say?
Yeah. So I was gonna say, like, maybe we could sort of lay out what happened in the conference, sort of go over each of the moments. Now, I came in sort of late. Like, I didn't come in until like Friday afternoon. But I hear that the Bereans, or at least some of the Bereans, I think I'm like technically part of the Bereans, but I wasn't able to pick up the VIP pass. So
same here.
Yeah, but
wait,
Square,
was that the only one who got it?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I know there was a couple others that I interacted with while they were at the conference, but yeah. So you want to explain sort of what the Berean sort of happened on Thursday night?
Yeah. So it wasn't anything like super eventful. It was just everybody. There was say a couple dozen people all in this room, and you had the speakers there, and you just went around, talked to people. It was just not sure how to explain it beyond that. It was a very interesting, because like we're all nerds, so there's like an interesting mixture of social adeptness. So that was an interesting dynamic. I introduced myself to Braxton Hunter there, and what was really funny is like I had this plan. I walked up to him and we had this conversation like, oh, what's your name? Where are you from? And all that. And I waited until he asked me specifically, have we interacted before saying, oh yeah, I'm Apologetic Squared. And when I did, he's like, oh, that was fun. I basically spent the whole time talking with Josh Rasmussen about propositions, because he has like this interesting metaphysical view where propositions are contingent, and like that's super interesting. So we just spent a lot of time talking about that.
Yeah, it's like a theology geek, like total dreamland, especially. Like
exactly.
You can talk to some of these guys you get to pick his brain for like 2 or 3 hours. That's got to be cool.
And he can't leave either, so he's stuck
right.
there.
He can't go.
Contractually obligated.
I got,
yeah.
The stream's got to end because I got to go have dinner. And you're like, no, you don't.
We're having dinner right here.
Yeah.
You can't.
One thing that's really cool about the people, the speakers, and also the Bereans like chat on Facebook is like how, especially Josh Rasmussen and Liz Jackson, but some of the other scholars, they make themselves so accessible and friendly, which is so cool. And like one of my favorite memories from the conference was I ended up totally randomly being in the back seat riding with Josh Rasmussen to dinner. And I mean, that's basically when I met him. And so of course I'm giving him my argument against naturalism from consciousness to get his thoughts, you know? So I get to just like talk to him and get his thoughts. And then he starts telling me because he's writing a book on consciousness right now, which is why I gave that argument. But just to hear get to hear him unpack it and just get direct access to pick his brain a little bit. And another thing I'll always remember is I caught him off guard a little bit with something totally accidentally, but it was really fun. He was on the way back from dinner. He started talking about explaining how he was going to talk about the ontological argument the next day. And I just randomly said it, and it was actually a shot in the dark on my end, but I said, "Oh, are you going to talk about Gödel's representation?" And he was like, "How did you know that?" And I was like, "Well, Josh, I've known you for so long. I've picked up on these things." But it was kind of a shot in the dark. Partly, I don't know the ontological argument that well, but I knew Gödel's representation is something pretty respected and analyzed. But that was a fun little moment where he was surprised that I guessed that. And then we got to hear, that was a really interesting, very precise talk, probably the most technical talk of the weekend. But just like take Liz Jackson again, like at the end of the weekend, there's like 20 people playing basketball with her. It was just so that accessibility to these first-rate scholars was where do you get that? It was really cool.
I want to ask something. Were you guys, and I know this is not as technical or anything like that, it has nothing to do with the philosophy and all that stuff. But were you guys surprised of how tall Liz Jackson is?
I thought you were going to say Josh Rasmussen.
Yeah, Josh.
Yeah. I imagine Josh being tall though, but Liz was a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't find that. Yeah, I didn't find Liz's height surprising at all. Yeah.
Josh shocked me because I didn't think he was
lanky,
short, but he's pretty dang tall.
Yeah, he's lanky. Like that's the word I'm going to use. I don't know. Is that a weird word? I think that's fine.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Like whenever there's a crowd of people, you can always like pick out Josh Rasmussen among them. Not only because he's so tall, but also because he'll usually have like 10 people sort of like surrounding him, just listening or talking to him. And that was a great thing. Is like everyone was so accessible. Like my favorite part of like the weekend maybe is like after the big debate between Trent Horn and Ben Watkins. Both of them just sort of sat on stage for the next maybe hour and a half or so, where people could just come up, walk, say hi, shake hands, ask questions. It was awesome just being able to like directly interact with people. And it was it was just so much fun just being like that close to people that you don't really get after the, Twitter or the YouTube sort of debates that take place. But just being able to be there with them was so cool. And like, just, the excitement that they all had was so enjoyable to be around.
If I can share one other quick personal interaction I had that was special for me, it was also a little bit strategic. I hope something comes from it. But Lee Strobel, I did kind of a deep dive about miracles 2 years ago or so. And Lee Strobel gave a talk at the conference that essentially he's given this exact talk before. It's a fantastic talk. If it's not officially up on Capturing Christianity, then you can, if you search Lee Strobel miracles, you can find it like at another church. But it's a really amazing talk, especially two very specific case studies he goes into. But one thing that's tough with miracles is some of these really amazing case studies, there's no direct access to like the medical documentation to the public. It doesn't mean it's not there. Like Lee might have even seen it, but like it's not printed in like Lee's book or something. And so I got to talk to him before his talk because I knew after the talk it was going to be hopeless. But I caught him before, and I got to tell him that. And I was saying that I feel like someone needs to write a book with like 8 to 10 case studies, really powerful case studies, and have the documentation right there in the book, or like a link to a database with the PDFs, make it accessible as possible. And it was really cool because he agreed. He was like, "You're right. Someone does need to write the book." Of course, he was like, "You need to write that book." And I was like, "Okay, Lee, sure." But he also said that he knew of a book a little bit similar to that, I think written by a doctor, but he couldn't remember the name of it. And he told me to email him afterwards. So I actually just emailed him today because I was following up on a bunch of stuff I'd forgotten about. And so hopefully I'll get that. And, I would love to share with you guys if any of you are interested. But That was cool, just because like I've been starving for that sort of book to be written, and it was so cool to go to someone with as much influence as Lee and be like, to tell him that and see him say he agrees, and maybe that book will be written, and maybe even I know Craig Keener is just about to release a new book on miracles, and maybe it's going to be something similar to that too. But anyway, that was another kind of cool moment for me, and like kind of networking as well.
That's great, Santi. I know you've had Liz on your channel a few times, right? I've watched a bunch of those streams. What was Liz's presentation? Did she actually present something?
Yeah, she did.
Did anybody watch it?
I didn't see her breakout session, but her main talk was to do with like the axiology of theism, like whether it would be good if God existed, and whether that should make any differences towards like our decision making and our like forming of worldviews.
So also,
Yeah.
John, what was the actual like? It was how long did the conference take place over, and like how many what was it? Just you go to different presentations, or how was it structured?
So let's see. It was Friday was when it officially started. Like Friday around 2:00 or so. That went on till I think 5 is when the debate was, and then the next day it started pretty early in the morning, like I think maybe 9, and then it went all the way till maybe 4:00, I think, and pretty much all within those time periods there was something going on. Like there was a few minutes that for taking a break for like a lunch or something like that, but like I don't know, I at least felt like I was always in the middle of something. Like there wasn't really a lot of time to sort of breathe except for like at the end of the night or something like that, and even then, like depending on, like for me, I was like staying up pretty late talking to Dry Apologist in person and just bouncing things off of him, which was a lot of fun. So even then I didn't get much sleep either until like after coming home. So yeah, let's see, on Friday there was a few sort of like just general talks, and then the debate that was there, and Liz Jackson's was I think one of the main talks on Friday. And then on Saturday, there were a few what were like referred to as breakout sessions, where you would have the 6 main speakers each sort of give a hour, 30-minute presentation, 30 minutes plus questions, presentation to their room, while everyone else is also doing the same thing. So like as an audience member, you sort of had to pick and choose which talks you were specifically
you had to pick
going
between
to.
like Josh Rasmussen and like
And they
Liz.
each person did it twice, so at least you got a chance if you missed one to get the other. But there were still others that I missed out on, like I didn't get to see Braxton Hunter's or Liz Jackson's either. Like the 2 that I picked were Josh Rasmussen's and Trent Horn's.
I did those too. Yeah.
What was Josh
Yeah,
Rasmussen's presentation?
Oh, argument from consciousness. By the way, I actually pulled up.
He actually presented that there.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Do anybody want to give me some details on that?
The basic, okay, it's actually really funny the way he presented it, because like the way he started it out is that he took a big blue Lego block and he asked his audience, raise your hand if you think that this piece of Lego is unable to think. And then everybody raises their hand, and he's like, well, actually, that's the most controversial premise in my argument, or the argument I'm going to be presenting. So let's unpack why this blue Lego cannot think. And then he proceeds for like the next 15 minutes or so to explain why blue Lego cannot think. So that was fun.
Yeah.
And he used the Lego also for his last presentation. Like, he was just carrying the Legos everywhere.
Yeah, just because
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting argument too. It was like basically, if a Lego block cannot have thoughts about other things, but it can be completely described using the physics and physical descriptions about spatiality, its dimensions, its weight, its mass, all that sort of thing, then that just tells us that there's some other features to thinking that are not going to be able to be explained through a sort of reductive account of consciousness.
The way I understood his argument is like, you take any 2 things, like a triangle and a square, and you ask, hey, how do you know these 2 things are different? then you can give some explanation like, oh, one has 3 sides and the other has 4 sides. It's like, oh, okay, how do you know 3 sides is different from 4 sides? And like you keep going on until you reach some sort of bedrock where you say, well, I can just see that these things are different. It doesn't go on forever. You just see that X and Y are different. And his argument was, hey, you could just take any mental property and any physical property and could just see that these things are different. So if you could take like a completely physical object, and a complete physical description of a blue Lego block, and you could just see that none of these properties that it has are the same as mental properties. So that's how we know that blue Legos can't think, but then we could apply the same things to brains. I could just see that there is no physical property of a brain, which is a mental property. That's... John, does that sound like an accurate reconstruction?
Yeah. That was good. Because, it was interesting because he was bringing in sort of like an epistemological sort of approach, and also like a sort of objective, like accounting of everything through the physical details of what the brain is or what a Lego block is. But it was a really interesting talk.
Was it a full? Was he trying to make a full apologetic for God, or was it just about the irreducibility of consciousness?
It was a very what's the word? A conservative case. It's like he didn't even say what kind of metaphysical theory you could have. It could be property dualism, or it could be substance dualism, or it could be panpsychism or idealism. It doesn't care, but it's just that materialism isn't the real one.
Right. So he was just trying to prove that you can't reduce the brain to just strictly physical properties.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you think
it was basically materialism wasn't an option.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been saying on my channel, is that a lot of times, and it sounds like he's doing what I've been suggesting, is to structure the argument so that it's less ambitious but less refutable, so that you actually get somewhere. Like I don't know. Anybody want to talk about that at all? Anybody want to say?
Well, Craig, it's just funny you phrase that way. I need to watch more of your stuff, clearly, because that's exactly like my epistemology is like, I want to make my arguments more meager in a sense, but more robust. And so, I totally agree. And when I try to argue about consciousness, to try to argue against materialism, I try to do the exact same thing. Like, I don't know how dualism works. I'm not sure it's dualism. I don't effing know. I'm also, it's kind of like Thomas Nagel a little bit of like, this won't fit in here. I don't know what it is, but it won't fit in this box.
In a sense, it's like taking the first step and proving the first step before you go to step 2. Like, if you set it up as a dualistic argument, then you set yourself up a high burden of proof. And basically, like Matt Dillahunty and Eric Hernandez, that's my role model debate, because Matt Dillahunty doesn't know that much about consciousness at all, and Eric Hernandez's knowledge on the subject is really good, but he structured the argument, thus this proves the soul, so he could lose the argument. You know what I'm saying? Which you don't need to do. You can structure the argument so that it can't be reduced to physical properties strictly, and that's it. That's all you're proving. And then go ahead.
I was going to say, my advice for people who are interested in miracles is to make a similar move here that very few people seem to make, which is don't try to prove that something came from God or supernatural. Simply, what we first got to do is show that blind people are now having sight after prayer. That's it. Like, even if it's psychosomatic, let's first just get set even on the data.
Psychosomatic is a great point, because one of the miracles that I always point out in my videos is once I became a Christian, as this isn't technically a miracle, sort of, but if you ask my mom, it was, I stopped drinking, stopped smoking, and stopped doing all sorts of recreational drugs within like a few months. Now, that's pretty miraculous.
That's amazing.
And that can be very easily explained in psychological terms, but it still really happened. And everybody understands that it happens. You don't have to necessarily prove that was God's hand on my life. You could explain it totally, and maybe I just got more peace of mind and didn't need to be doing these things anymore. You can explain it in terms that are more atheist friendly, I guess you would say, or whatever. But that's how I see it. Anybody else want to say anything?
I was going to ask each of the participants here, what was your sort of favorite talk, presentation, or debate, if you want to say that, over the course of the convention?
Oh, I liked Josh's argument, the ontological argument. It's like that was super interesting. Like, he's like, we could go from the concept of God to God's existence. And then it's like, he asked, well, can you even do that? Can you go from the concept of something to the existence of that thing? And then he's like, maybe you can't. We have this principle. You cannot go from the concept of C to the existence of C. And then I'm like sitting in the audience, and I'm sitting next to Christian idealism, and I whispered to him, oh, you could just use some sort of self-referential concept to violate that principle. Christian idealism is like, oh, you mean like the concept of a concept? And he's like, yeah. And Josh in his presentation, it's like, well, the concept of a concept.
And you're like, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But he goes from the concept of God, or the concept of perfection, to the existence of God, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I really appreciated how he like used the principle of explosion as like one, like if the property of absolute perfection is not possible, then it would entail a contradiction, and so or something like that. Yeah, go ahead.
The way I like, can I just explain the kind of argument?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. Yeah. So the idea is you take some concept and then you think of everything that that concept entails. So like the concept of a unicorn, it entails a horn, or it entails 4 hooves and all that fun stuff. So you think of everything the concept entails. Fun. And then there's an interesting thing about impossible concepts. If something like isn't possible, then it entails everything. So then Josh Rasmussen appealed to like some sort of innate understanding we all have about the concept of perfection. We all understand that the concept of perfection doesn't entail anything that's negative. We just all intuitively know that. But that's what that means, is that the concept of perfection, if it doesn't entail anything negative, then it can't be impossible. Because if it was impossible, then it would entail everything, including negative stuff. So the concept of perfection is not impossible, which is a fancy way of saying the concept of perfection is possible. And the concept of perfection includes necessary existence, and by the S5 axiom of modal logic, the concept of perfection is actually exemplified. Yeah. So we go from just our innate understanding about what perfection is to, yeah, God exists.
Yeah, it was a really interesting talk. And like, I remember after that talk, I had to like go drive to the hotel to pick something up. And like that whole drive over, I was like thinking about modality and like possibility the whole way there and back. And like even like afterwards, I talked to Caleb, dry apologist, like for probably a good hour and a half that night, like staying up late into the night, and him just sort of like explaining what his sort of criticisms were of various ontological arguments. And it was really interesting just from that experience, being able to like discuss this and get a better understanding and grasp on these sorts of things. That was definitely a great talk.
Yeah.
What about you, Santi?
For me, it was Trent Horn's presentation. I thought it was really interesting, and since I've been doing a lot of study about Mormonism and stuff like that, I was like, that would be like that's like the end of Mormonism right there with that, with classical theism and just being able to.
Was this his breakout session?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Originally on the like schedule, it was going to be him presenting the argument for motion, because he wasn't originally going to be debating. And then like he got pulled into being one of the debaters, and so he's just sort of like made the breakout session into just a general sort of explanation of classical theism. So it was pretty interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Oh yeah, it's really good. And then afterwards, I just had to ask him. I was like, hey, what do you think about presenting this to Mormons? And he was like, oh, that would be amazing. Like that would be the end of Mormonism as the foundational understanding of God, how they think about God and all those things. So I was like, man, that was really good.
Yeah. Classical theism annoys me though. Like I assign a low credence to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I think both me and Caleb, like at various points in during the conference, both like had discussions with you, like trying to defend classical theism or divine simplicity.
Yeah.
So I haven't won you over yet, but one day.
Yeah, maybe.
That was another cool thing about the conference, was it was very ecumenical. I feel like I met a lot of Catholics there. The primetime debater Catholic. I had lunch with 2 Mennonites from deep in Pennsylvania. Very cool people that I'm now Facebook and Instagram friends with. So I absolutely love that. It would be cool just to have a survey of what denomination, what type of Christian or non-believer you were. I kind of wish we had that data, just because it felt pretty varied to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's also Eastern Orthodox guys there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Robert, what was your sort of favorite talk or presentation? Or
I mean, I think overall it would have to be the debate. I thought the debate just went really well. I feel like that's going to be a bigger discussion. So let me pause just for a second to say I loved Liz Jackson's talk as well. And actually, it's good to bounce off what you guys were just saying about Josh Rasmussen's talk to go to Liz, because as much as I love ontological arguments and stuff, you are more in the weeds there than most any argument, in very technical propositions. Yeah, and that's why I think something like Liz Jackson, her talk was about, should you want God to exist? Like, let's stop talking about if God exists, and for a second, should you want an ultimate perfect being to exist? And because I think, as someone who really likes practical epistemology, we all have to zoom out at some point. We need to zoom in and look at the weeds, but at some point you zoom out and say, how much does this matter? Which do I lean towards? Which should I lean towards morally, if that is even answerable? And so I thought she gave a very clear, rigorous defense of the idea that we should want Christianity to be true. And I think that's a really powerful thing to add to your toolkit, because that means that if your credence drops to 45%, you don't have to immediately throw it all in the garbage bin, because like maybe we should still want it to be true, And so I love that. But the debate was fantastic. I knew Ben was going to be a great debater, and I wasn't familiar really with Trent Horn personally, so I had no idea how he would hold up. I think he did a fantastic job, especially in the rebuttals. I thought he did a really good job, but both were great. Both are great, brought up really good points. And I feel like the audience was just like totally engaged. Great question and answer time. So that was a highlight for me, was the debate.
The one thing I want to add to what you said is part of the reason I've watched almost all of Liz Jackson on Santi's channel, and I've watched all her videos on practical epistemology. Like, that's where I think she's really good, where she talks about just how you come to beliefs, and it's more of a structured practicality to it. It's like, this is how people actually come to believe things. And it's I think her stuff in that particular area is really useful. I've listened to a lot of her videos.
Totally
I
agree.
like her, actually. I think she's first rate. I think she's really good. So,
I should mention her I went to her breakout session, which was, should you go to grad school in philosophy? And she said she basically has all that material on her channel as well. So if you're interested in that, I think she's talked about that on her channel. But it was a great discussion. She had a handout at just all the pros and cons, and very honest look at what are you trying to do with philosophy? Is it worth it? So that was really cool to hear that as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what was probably my favorite, and it probably would be the debate, just because like it's not often that you really get this high level sort of in-depth discussion regarding a sort of niche sort of like particular model of God, that being classical theism. A lot of times there'll be a sort of like vague or less defined sort of understanding of God as maybe like the creator of the universe or something like that. But it was really nice seeing like Ben hone in on criticisms of classical theism in particular for much of his sort of responses. And also I was actually surprised with how well Trent Horn did in actually like defending the philosophical sort of backings behind classical theism and Thomism in general, which I actually was, even as a fan of Trent Horn, I wasn't aware that he was as adept within the philosophical sort of like defense of classical theism. So I was happy with that. And it's not often you get to see a debate like this at such a high level, and that's what I really appreciated about the debate between Trent Horn and Ben Watkins, and also
All right.
being able to hang out with Ben Watkins afterwards and like pick his brain on a lot of stuff too. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Ben
All right,
is
so
actually.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that Ben is actually pretty approachable. I
Oh, yeah.
talked to him just for a few minutes, and um, I'm actually gonna be probably having a conversation between him and another philosopher on my channel about abortion, because that's one of the main things that that Trent like kind of like brought up against Ben, like, you know, his views and morality, and I think he mentioned infanticide a couple times and stuff like that, and I think that just overall, like all the speakers, man, it was just their flexibility and just you being willing, like, you know, for them to be willing to have a conversation with you. We haven't really talked much about Cy Gart. I don't know what you guys think about his presentation, like how he was talking about from a scientific view, you know, how you can see all this complexity, and he will argue that that seems to be better explained by theism rather than atheism. And you know, as someone who came from atheist and now is a Christian, like, I thought that was really interesting.
I missed that talk because it was at like 8:30. But what was really interesting, 8:30 in the morning on Saturday. But what was really interesting is Ben Watkins posted to Facebook after the conference, and he said one of his favorite talks was Cy Gart's, which surprised me because I feel like atheists often brush off more biological arguments because it just smells of anti-evolution to them, you know? So yeah, please, for any of you who also saw Cy Gart's, I would love to hear more about it.
Oh, the tone I got from his presentation was partly one of annoyance. It's like, guys, evolution doesn't matter here. The real thing we have to focus on is abiogenesis. Like, his basic argument was that there are certain things that need to be in place before evolution can happen, and that's like, one of them is that you need to have replication of, well, yourself and your genetics and slight variation within that. So the first thing that you have that has the ability to evolve will already have those abilities built into it. So then it's like, okay, how did we get that thing? And he's like,
Right.
Evolution can take care of the rest if you want. But before that, what made that thing? He called it Luca. And it's like, what made Luca? That's what we should be focusing on.
That's like about one of the few things that he would admit that is an example of irreducible complexity, which is kind of cool.
And he says that was a big part of him becoming a Christian. Was it that sort of argument for him?
Can't remember if he said that argument specifically.
Okay.
I think with him, it had to do more with an actual experience. Like, I've heard I've read some of it and also heard him talk about it, where he explains how he was already kind of like in this place of he wasn't really sure and all that stuff, but then he was in the car traveling and started listening to some stuff, and he just had this one like aha moment, and he just got out of his car and he just believed in God. It was just like one of those situations. It's just there was like a progress, but at the end it was just like everything came all together, and
Epiphany.
And just had that aha moment.
Progress towards epiphany.
Right.
I just remembered. I actually want to change my answer for what my favorite.
No, you
talk
can't,
or
John. Your
discussion
answer's
was.
on record. It's too late.
It's locked
Well,
in.
This were
I'm
my
adding
Python
another
would be
one.
thrown off the bridge.
Oh,
Wait, my favorite was this. No, I mean,
if you choose another one, then we each could have our own. So that, yeah, choose another one.
Okay.
I vote yes.
All right. I was gonna say the panel discussion at the end of the night.
I was about to
where
bring that up.
all what is it? All 6 or all 8 of the panelists, or
Are we
like,
counting Cameron?
yeah, I'm not sure. All of them were just sat there at the edge of the stage and then like took questions for like an hour and a half, I think.
And they included the atheists, which honestly they didn't have to do. Like he didn't give a talk. He was a part of the debate. And so if they didn't want to, they could have easily found an excuse. But I totally love that they included him. And he was a part of most of the answers. And it added a lot of humor, honestly, to have him. And that I was absolutely was one. And there were some surprising answers too. Like I loved when they would ask a question to the whole panel, like what theory of like providence, and didn't most of them favor Molinism? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, a few of them, yeah.
That's because it's the only correct view.
Ben actually, he answered that. He's like, yeah, I'm an open theist. And it's like, that's a bit of a weird answer. I would have expected him to say, if God exists, he was an open theist, but maybe he just converted really quickly and didn't notice.
No, you guys got him. You guys won.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so let me tell you the thing the really funny story about the debate, because I want to hear your guys' impression.
Okay.
I watched the debate because they posted it, and then because Trent Horn was now in my, I don't know how YouTube works, but that always happens. Now I started getting all these things Trent Horn, so sent to my YouTube feed. So I watched Dan Barker debate with Dan Barker, and the difference between Ben Watkins and Dan Barker debating was like night and day. I mean, it was like, you know, I couldn't actually believe how stark the difference was, because Ben was presenting like really well thought out arguments, and actually literally Dan Barker's rebuttal to the argument for motion was, well, that's just words. I mean, that's just philosophy. That's just word. So what did you think about the debate is the question. And what do you think about, I thought a couple of things that Ben Watkins laid down were about the strongest counter apologetics that are out there. I don't know if they work as formal arguments, but I think they're the strongest intuitions that probably a non-believer would have. So what would you guys say? Anybody can jump in.
I really like that he formulated everything within a kind of Bayesian framework. That is something I appreciate. I like Bayesian kind of framing of things. Although there's some like stuff that I thought was, I don't want to call it like sloppy, but it's like quite objectionable. It's like he would say that the probability of X given theism is 0. And it's like, well, that you can't, it's very hard to get that, because it could be the case that there's just some explanation that you hadn't thought of for why X would be true given theism. So like all you could say is that the probability of this is really low given theism.
Yeah, it's funny. I brought that up to some of the Realia Theology guys before, because they were all working together on his presentation. And like one of the guys from Realia Theology was like telling him like, no, you can't have like a 0.0 probability of non-resistant non-believers. That's like not even, but the reason... Yeah, the reason that Ben Watkins went about doing it was because he knew that Trent Horn was going to be presenting a deductive case. And so if Trent Horn has a deductive case, then any sort of evidential argument is going to be capable of being, like any evidential argument that has at least some probability of being false is going to be automatically able to be encapsulated into his deductive case. And so that's why he was like trying to make, like it's an evidentialist case, but with a probability of 0 that this evidence would be found under theism, so that he could respond to the deductive case that Trent Horn was going to be making.
Okay, so that actually confuses me, because afterwards I asked Ben about that. I'm like, were you just rounding to one decimal place when you wrote 0.0? And he's like, no, it's actually 0% probability given theism. And I'm like, well, okay, here's some really wacky explanation, like in all feasible worlds where there's like salvation or whatever, then in those feasible worlds there's non-resistant non-believers. Like that is some non-zero probability. So I don't think, and he's like, well, hey, at least I've got you thinking probabilistically. That was his response.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was this. I really appreciated the debate, and I really loved the high level of discussion. There's one element, though, that irked me towards the end, is that this is something that I hear Ryan Mullins say, too, in his criticisms of divine simplicity, in saying that, like, any sort of extrinsic change or Cambridge change, well, that's still a type of change, and so therefore it disproves divine simplicity. And like, no defender of divine simplicity is going to be willing to accept that. And it doesn't even make sense to say that an extrinsic change, which is something outside of you that changes, that suddenly the subject actually changes. And so
I had a
that was-
birthday. Classical theism disproven.
yeah, I know. So I don't know. That was my criticism, my like bit of criticism for Ben Watkins there. But
Oh.
I still get it. Like Brian Mullins, who has been saying the same sort of thing against divine simplicity, and so like Brian Mullins is a big sort of attacker of divine simplicity. I'm saying attacker, but somebody that's critically analyzing.
He's a warrior. He uses guerrilla warfare against classical theism.
He needs to be destroyed by the
yeah.
One point.
Go
Go ahead.
I was just gonna quickly add. It was funny watching the debate because it's like, oh, I disagree with both of you completely. Neither of you like. I don't want to come to. I find it very unlikely that either of your positions are true. That classical theism is true, or that naturalism is true.
You both lose. You both lose.
You're all just wrong.
Giant brain squared. That's like rejecting both sides.
What do you guys think about his objection of the perfect world? Like how God shouldn't be able to like create anything less than a perfect world. Like I thought. I mean, I have my thoughts about that, but I just I think that there are some basic misunderstandings on that. But then he might have explained it later, like what he meant by that. But to me, like it's just I couldn't fully understand what he means by perfect. Like,
wait, are you talking about Ben?
Yeah,
what's that?
You're talking about Ben when you say he.
Yeah, Ben.
Ben, yes.
Okay.
Well, my initial reaction was like, oh, when you say perfect world, do you mean by world a maximally consistent set of propositions? If so, then you're appealing to heaven isn't appealing to a world because heaven isn't a world in that case. But then if you don't mean that, you mean something else. It's like, okay, how does the like existence of heaven like appeal to that? So if you're thinking heaven is just a portion of a world in the more global sense, how does that in any way commit the theist to there being a totality of a world where it's all perfect like heaven? It just seemed like a bit of a non sequitur based off of the different uses of the word world. But he probably meant something else that he just had difficulty explaining in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, I noticed there was a bit of like confusion on Trent's part in thinking that like what he meant by a perfect world is like the best possible world. And so that could have been clarified a bit from Ben, and I think it was eventually in the debate.
And what do you? Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, that was a great moment.
He also said like there are tons of best, or he believes that there are tons of best possible worlds. And I'm like, well, then they're not the best because they have.
Yeah, that was a misstep on his part when he misphrased
Yeah, he just
that
means like the best type of world. That's what
they all tie for first place.
Yeah, and so I think probably like to give the devil his due, he probably would think that like, okay, if God can create heaven at some point in time, then why couldn't God create heaven at the initial point of time?
Right.
Because like if God's all powerful and all of that, then it seems like God doesn't need anything outside of himself to help him make heaven.
Counterfactual,
I think
like freedom. I'm telling you.
Well, I think I agree with someone like Ben that, or the way I would say it does. That is one of the knottier issues in my mind, is fully understanding and explaining that, because it gets really complicated. Because like you throw in free will and soul building, okay, but what about babies who die and then go straight to heaven? So they don't have soul building. Okay, so what about purgatories? Then why aren't we already in purgatory?
Yeah.
Why is this better than purgatory? And then okay, then we're perfect, but we can sin, but we don't, or we're perfect, but we can't sin. And how is that different than Adam and Eve? And then how is that different than the angels? And it gets, in some ways, the complexity almost becomes an advantage, if you know what I mean. Like if there's enough escape routes. But I totally admit to the atheists, it gets weird. It's so weird, and we're talking about concepts that are getting so foreign from our daily experience that we have to be careful. But I agree with the atheists that it's a hard issue that needs to be wrestled with.
I happen to have one theodicy that solves all of those problems at the same time.
Oh man, I want to hear it.
But it's long, so I need to make a video.
I think maybe another stream will have to go over that.
Yeah, and some other time I'll explain it eventually.
Yeah. No, yeah, and like what you're talking about there, Robert. Yeah, I was just remembering that night when we were having food with Caleb, dry apologist, and like talking for a long time, just sort of going over theodicies and like talking about the problem of evil and the problem of like the resurrection and all these other things. That was yeah, definitely a moment that stood out for me that I really enjoyed being able to share with you guys.
Totally agree. Great conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to bring up one quick thing about the debate, just that I noticed. Ben really stressed something he called the gap problem. And it just did not really land for me. And I thought Trent really answered it well. Basically, Ben was trying to say that, you know, only some of your arguments would lead you to believe in Christianity or whatever, which wasn't even the debate topic, or a perfect God. Some of it would just lead you to believe in a creator God. But it just seemed like a pretty easy argument to answer of like, well, that's fine. That's how we reason through a lot of life. Like, first you decide that a crime was a murder, not a suicide, and then you figure out who the perpetrator was. Like, those can be separate steps, you know? So like, I don't know, that was a weird moment to me because I still don't fully understand why Ben was harping on that much. Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the problem goes beyond just that, not being able to connect it to Christianity specifically, but also like attributes. Some of those arguments don't tell you anything about attributes. Like, what sort of attributes do you expect from this deity? Like, I'm not really sure, but maybe you guys can correct me on this. But he actually mentioned that there could be a possible. Well, maybe he mentioned, or maybe I heard somebody else mention this, that there's a possibility that yes, you have this one deity, but yet this deity could be like an evil one or something like that, and therefore it's like that is totally, alien whenever you think about Christianity and this argument that you're trying to use to prove Christianity. But I get it. I get what you're saying, because at the end of the day, it's like you have this sort of progress. You go from this argument to another argument to another argument until eventually you get to Christianity, and it seems to work out pretty well. But I don't know. I think I don't. To me, the gap problem doesn't seem to be very powerful.
I think it is actually pretty like noteworthy, because it's like some of our strongest arguments, in my estimation, get you something that or doesn't get you any further than, say, an Oppian kind of view where you have the necessary initial state. Like, maybe, or like, why couldn't the initial state of the universe be the unactualized actualizer? And then like the arguments that classical theists have that God is like morally perfect and omniscient and all these things, they strike me as a little implausible, especially because when they're giving these properties to God, they're not really properties, they're just predicates that they're saying God has. So it's a little weird. Yeah, so from a classical theist like kind of argumentation that Trent gave, especially, I think that the gap problem is sizable.
You're muted, John.
Whoops. And that's fair, especially since, yeah, the argument that Trent presented, I don't think if it entailed really that God would be all loving, or the unactualized actualizer would be something that cares about human affairs or anything like that. And I think that's why he was like trying to supplement it with the moral argument towards the end there. But even then, since I don't know, it seems like a bit weaker. Like, I get that there were like points of evidence that seemed to like, or like evidence that points to some sort of theistic or maybe personalistic grounding for morality. But theoretically, that could be a different entity than the unactualized actualizer. Like, you could theoretically have sort of the form of the good, which is maybe a personal being, but also have this sort of demiurge, or like originator to reality. And so, like, yeah, I think as a classical theist, there needs to be more work put into actually bridging that gap from the ultimate foundation to reality to the personal God that's omnibenevolent and all loving and cares for humans, all of that jazz.
Yeah, I think Trent's point was in response was that like I think most of Trent's arguments ended up with something that at least seemed to refute naturalism. So you already, I mean, if the debate was about kind of, naturalism versus not, then you're already outside of that box. But I mean, you guys are totally right. And I mean, talking about the gap problem at least wakes you up to make sure you don't make assumptions where it's like, okay, we're talking about the Kalam cosmological argument, therefore Jesus on the cross or whatever. You can't just do that.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
the main premise of the argument was, does God exist? Like, that's the question.
Mhm.
So I think, the God problem, well, if the argument succeeds and you have that God problem, is still, I think that the question has been answered. And so therefore,
Yeah, totally. The
yeah.
the most that you're going to do in a formal argument is get somebody to, think theism is, get somebody to like a little bit lean towards theism more than they ever were. You're not going to get somebody to Christianity, so the gap problem is kind of a way of like avoiding the implications of, if there are solid implications in the theological argument for God, like a generic God, then that's a way of avoiding the implications of that. Well, it's not Christianity. Well, that's not really what the point is. You know what I mean? Christianity is requires like some prayer and conviction on your part to go and actively seek and actively try and it requires prayer and experience from you that you need to actively cultivate to some degree. Like, I don't think it can necessarily be proven in the same sense, but there's almost, I think that the generic arguments for like just a sort of general theistic idea, I think there's provability there that could actually work. I don't know if that made sense how I just said it, but
there was a funny thing too. We all know Joe Schmid, who's sort of like set his sights on the mechanistic understanding of classical theism, has like, what was it? Maybe like 5 or 6 hours after the debate went
totally.
up, he had like a 3-hour rebuttal to the
How
Horn's
Trent
sort of
Horn
opening
just
case.
proved God does not exist or something like that.
yeah,
that was pretty
so
funny.
Disprove Christianity. His argument was that if Trent disproved an infinite past, he also disproved an infinite future. So hey, there's no heaven for you Christians.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Dang it, Trent! Why'd you do that?
Yeah, Trent blew it for us. He was supposed to like win the day. He went, wait a minute, you just proved that God does not exist. What do we do?
I guess we'll have to turn to Ben Watkins now to be our leader.
The strongest leg. I was wondering what your guys' response is when he was talking about the problem for the argument is it doesn't work as an argument, but as an intuition. I get why atheists would totally keep going back to this, like evolution over millions of years and teleological evil, which he was I think it was in his opening statement. Why would like, thousands of years ago there'd be animals suffering and there's no humans around? Like, why on earth? Like, it's a intuition. Like, if Pine Creek ever starts thinking like, I'm starting to lean towards Christianity, he could just start thinking about that a lot and bring himself back to atheism. But it doesn't really work as an argument, I don't think. I don't know, what do you guys think? I'm not sure if I asked the question right.
I think I actually have to go. So love talking to y'all. Gotta go. Goodbye.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Squared.
Oh yeah. Thanks for having me.
Squared.
See ya. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
There we go. Yeah, I mean the problem of animal suffering and the problem of like teleological evils within the evolutionary span of history are significant problems for theism, and especially.
Well, I don't see them as problems. I see them as strong
Open
intuitions.
questions.
Well, I get why that's really compelling to an atheist, but it's just an open question. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I would see it. Not necessarily. I don't see it as a problem. Go ahead. I cut you off.
No. Yeah, I don't know. That has at least been my sort of like main sticking point. Like, I can find certain like horrendous evils maybe that occur to humans. I can figure out ways in which to respond to those. But like for animals who are not like moral subjects, they're like sort of irrational but they're still capable of like experiencing pain and some amount of suffering. Maybe it's not a significant amount of suffering, but like it's at least something that's worth considering. Oh, I've lost Santi as well.
What happened? Did you kick him out, or did you...
I didn't kick him. He's like, I'm done with this. We got some evolution heads in here.
Animal suffering.
No. Yeah, I find it. Oh, there he goes. Okay, I think there you go.
Sorry about that, guys.
Oh,
I thought it might have been because we were talking about evolution. You were like, "Oh no, they don't believe in the young Earth. I gotta get out." Of here.
Heretics, goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think it's a significant problem. That's why, like, I've been trying to develop a theodicy that's specifically targeting that as a problem and like how Christians can be able to respond. And so far, I'm somewhat satisfied with it. I'm still like testing it out with a few people. I call it the participation theodicy. But I've been like workshopping it a bit and talking with a few people and just seeing how much legs it has. But eventually, I hope to like make a video on it to sort of clarify my thoughts.
Cool.
Did you chat with Ben Watkins about that theodicy, or did you chat with a skeptic?
I haven't talked to Ben in person about it. I might have talked to him about it on Discord, since we sometimes talk, like him or some of the other Real A Theology team members will talk on Discord sometimes. I've talked to Honestly Atheist, who's on Twitter. You guys might know. I like him. I talked to him about it some, and Emerson Green about it, and then Chris Rhodes. Like after the recent debate that he had on Dry Apologist channel, that we had a sort of after show, and then like two other atheists came on to like really grill me on my theodicy, and like it was
oh nice. That's where I saw it mentioned. I saw that mentioned in the comments of that happened. That's cool.
Wait, who came on to grill you? That was on the Discord.
I was in Discord after the Chris Rhodes versus Chris the Theist Thinkers debate. We joined Emerson Green's Discord, and we they grilled me on the theodicy. I don't know if you guys would be familiar with the atheist. There's a guy who goes by Bread Santa on Discord, and another guy that goes by Ya Boy Panth. And I think Ya Boy Panth is actually like in Reddit a lot, like responding to or like presenting some like strong atheistic arguments in Reddit. So, but anyway, yeah. So that's at least something I'm working on in regards to the problem of animal suffering and of that. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that problem.
For me, yeah, so it's interesting, Craig, you were saying like, is it just an intuition? But for my epistemology, I like to say that the only thing that beats an intuition is better intuition, all the way down to logical primitives. So, so I take it very seriously, that intuition. I think it also might just sort of reduce down into some of the problems we were talking about of heaven too. Like, why aren't we already in heaven? Assuming some other potential theodicies of like soul buildings. But soul building doesn't apply to animals. Probably you guess maybe, I don't know. That gets weird.
Then flies in my kitty cat. She's the cutest thing on earth. She's been soul building the whole time. Things like so awesome. But no, it doesn't.
By the way, that was another key moment of the night, was when Trent Horn dropped that he didn't think pets are in heaven. And the best part, the best part was he had just had that zinger against Ben like less than a minute ago, and everyone's like clapping, and then he says pets don't go to heaven, and everyone's like
throwing tomatoes at him. Like,
that was so funny to me. But I also think you have to bring in divine hiddenness and non-resistant non-belief. I also agree with some people that sort of reduces down to like this problem of evil and all this suffering. Yeah, and I do think animal suffering in particular is tough. I think there's so many variables here that I want to honor that intuition of this is a major problem, but there's just so much going on there. Like, is it true that almost all animals, except for like the higher primates, don't have what we would really acknowledge as self-awareness, that they truly are aware that they're in pain in a meaningful way? And it might sound harsh to say that, and it might be false to say that, and we should give the benefit of the doubt that they are in pain, especially in our actions, but also in our theodicy. Like, I don't think we're on safe ground to just try to brush it away. Plus, you still have the higher primates too. Even if you do somehow brush it away, you don't solve it for chimps or whatever. So I also have a very strong view of free will and like angelic free will. And I think there's many open questions of how that affected the whole cosmos and when in history the fall happened, like the angelic fall. So I'm a big Greg Boyd fan who goes off the deep end for some people in a lot of ways, but he has a book. I actually haven't read it, but an influential book he wrote is called Satan and the Problem of Evil. And I think he deals with a lot of this idea of that evil and sin pervades things in a way that is we don't fully grasp. And
that's very similar to some of dry apologists.
Oh, cool.
There's a whole argument that I want him to start practicing on my channel that addresses it the same way. That this is because I think what was Santi asking about? Like the original thing that Ben said was that a perfect God would only create a perfect world, right? Wasn't that the gist of what Ben was saying? Like a perfect God would create a perfect world, or couldn't create anything.
Wouldn't create anything less than a perfect world.
Cool.
Oh,
Christian idealism. Welcome.
Yeah. Hey,
welcome,
Kyle.
welcome. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So if anyone knows me, I'm Kyle Allender. I run the Christian Idealism YouTube channel. I've met most of you guys in person, so glad to be here. Sort of discuss. I don't know how much longer you guys. Sorry, I couldn't join earlier, but
That's all right.
Yeah.
Welcome.
That's all right. So what was your biggest take? Well, you probably watched the consciousness with the argument from consciousness with Josh Rasmussen, right? Did you go to that one? That's all right. So what was your biggest take?
Caleb.
You probably watched the consciousness with
Caleb, you gotta mute the stream.
with Josh Rasmussen. I was like, what?
All right. I muted.
Was John Apologist imitating me? Like, that's a really good
Mocking
imitation.
you, Craig.
Yeah. So I went to Lit Jackson one first because I'm gonna get a philosophy degree, but then I went to Josh's afterwards, the second one, and I thought it was pretty good. He actually presented like a really good argument against reductionism, so I appreciate that. So yeah, I think like the only way you're gonna be able to avoid those kind of issues is if you're a non-reductive, if you hold like some non-reductive view. So.
And the dry man. You want to introduce yourself, dry guy, and tell us what you thought about the conference?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I enjoyed meeting with these guys and others the most. I thought it was just chill. Like I wasn't sure if it was going to be kind of awkward, meeting with people that you only know from online, but some people recognized me. It was fun.
Did you recognize John Buck right away? Did you recognize him in person?
Yeah. Well, John picked me and my wife up at the airport, but we had to find each other first.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I recognized Kyle and Santi right away. Robert spotted me, but then I recognized him. But anyway.
So if you guys want to jump in, we were talking about the perfect world aspect. I don't know, Sandy, did I cut you off? Did you want to finish what you were saying? And then feel free to jump in when you want, guys. Did I cut you off, Sandy? You were saying...
No. That was you were asking what he was saying, and I just basically brought it up. Like again, what I guess what his objection was. But yeah, I don't have much to say other than what I said earlier.
Okay.
Much it, yeah.
Because I mentioned that to Robert that your theodicy kind of explains some of this tripologist, or tries to contend with some of I think the open question, as I understood it, was why wouldn't a perfect God create a perfect world? And we start out there. Am I getting that right, John? Is that kind of roughly it?
Yeah. And I've debated Ben on this a while back on Converse Contenders channel. I mean, I've developed the argument a little more since then. But yeah, Ben and I have had a lot of back and forth over the last couple of years.
So there's a few things because after I finish this long ass video, because it's gonna be that video was a pain in the ass to make. 2 hours.
Wow.
So yeah, I was like, that video was like the most difficult video that I have ever made. So anyway, so when it comes to Problem of Evil, obviously I think that theists should be more focused on the newer versions. So I don't think like the older versions just are pretty much dead at this point. Although I think that the logical problem and the evidential problem are very much connected. So it's kind of hard for me to like tell a difference because I think that they both can be evidential approaches, right? It's just maybe the logical problem might be a stronger form of evidential approach. So,
Well, I was saying before you guys got on that it functions more as an intuition than as an actual.
well, I mean, there's a few things. So the first thing, of course, is there has to be some relevant difference between a perfect world and a perfect being, right? So if there's a be relative, you have to like set the ground. Okay, what is a perfect world in the first place? Like, what does that even entail? And then the other thing you have to ask is, what if we just grant? Okay, we grant that God has to create a perfect world. Okay, does that mean that God has to do it immediately? I think that's the real question we should be asking.
Because in Christian theology, he did create a perfect world. The only question is who's going there. Is it everybody? Is it somebody? Is it just the bad? Is it just the good people? Is it just Craig Reed and John Buck and us and like a few others? Or is it like everyone? Or
You just reminded me just very quickly something Trent Horn said that I had never really heard before, which is he resorted in the debate to, he threw out the idea, okay, let's take the B theory of time, and now the perfect world of heaven, it already exists, and like maybe this timeline overall is the perfect arrangement with this perfection on the, and I was like, okay, I don't know if I totally go with that, but it was still clever. I'd never really heard it.
I can actually go all the way with that sometimes. Depends on the mood I'm in, because like in a sense, it's almost like the story's written and we're just acting it out.
Right.
And like
painfully
I don't know, sometimes I feel like that's what's going on. Like, you know, when you have a sense of personal destiny or something. So that's not totally foreign to me. I kind of think that can work. But what you said earlier is, I think, the gist of it, because the question about intuition is what's stronger. I mean, if you have really strong like religious experiences and you're 100% convinced that God exists, the questions become sort of superfluous. They don't work as like defeaters for Christianity. They're just, oh yeah, that's an interesting question about the nature of how things are. That's
and arguably people like the disciples were like that, you know, that they didn't have perfect philosophical answers to the problem of evil, but they knew Jesus, saw him heal, knew he was good, and knew some basic answers to the problem of evil, perhaps of like how God was going to fix it, but they didn't. Yeah. So exactly.
And the Bible is clear on the instructions: is trust the Lord with all your heart, claim not to your own understanding. So you don't have to wrestle with the implications of how the world is. You're called to serve God to the best of your ability, you know, and trust that the way the world is a manifestation of his perfection, or of, you know, a manifestation of God's glory. And in the end, we'll all see that and know that. That's how I would see it. Anybody? Caleb? Idealism? Anyone? Let's comment. John?
Well, I was just going to ask, I am curious now, since we went over everyone else, I want to know what Kyle and Caleb's like favorite parts of the conference were.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. So it's really hard to say. Honestly, probably the best part of the conference was, if I'm just restricting myself to the conference, because we went out to eat to a lot of places. I don't even, but besides that, the best part of the conference is probably, I like Josh's talk the most. because it's a new argument. So it's not like the regular, like I've never heard anyone try to argue that you can just argue God from the concept of God. That was a pretty new concept to me. I know Josh, like, I know he's been working on things like whether or not atheism entails a contradiction, because I know I uploaded his video on that on my channel, but like just arguing from God from the concept, like I was just like, whoa, this is a new argument. And at least initially the argument, because I'm very skeptical of like just arguments in general. I take sort of an Oppian approach to arguments, but like his argument was actually not that bad. Like it actually was a pretty interesting argument that I have to think more on. I don't know if it works, but I do like admit that like it's not an argument that you could really use parodies against. So it's different in that sense.
That's cool. Dry, what was your favorite?
Of the talks, I liked Rasmussen's talks. So yeah, his ontological argument and his talk on consciousness, because he was presenting new arguments, and I thought they were, yeah, it was just more up my alley of interest.
So is he trying to update the ontological argument? Are they going to post this, or was this only for the conference goers? Because I didn't see that posted anywhere yet.
It will be posted eventually, but I don't know when, because I know he's gonna post like all the interviews and stuff as well as like the other side interviews. I don't know how he's gonna do that, but
so it's an update of like, if you can imagine the perfect being like,
yeah, I forgot. I don't remember what the formulation was, but basically it went where you saw
Squared. Squared sort of went over the argument earlier in the conversation. Craig, you must have been asleep during that. But yeah,
no, I was trying to run things, John. I was making sure that everything flowed smoothly. You know, it's like smoothing up, greasing the wheels, and being a host.
I actually asked Cameron right after Josh Rasmussen's talk, like, okay, is that going up on YouTube? Because like there's a lot there that I still need to process. And he said, yeah, it's going to go up on YouTube, but it's going to be like 6 months. So that's what he was saying.
6 months.
Wow.
Okay.
I think all the main talks were recorded, and they're gonna be posting them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Not the breakout sessions, but only like the one that I did, Braxton. Basically, all the main conversations where we were all together in the same room.
Yeah.
I just felt like we should at least mention Luke Barnes also did a talk, the very first talk, about fine tuning. And I thought it was one of the better fine-tuning presentations I've ever heard. Like it was just, and even, I mean, it wasn't just strictly about fine-tuning, right? Like I can't, he only got to the traditional kind of cosmological aspect towards the end, or at least halfway through. But he wasn't there in person because of travel restrictions. But I still really enjoyed it. And I look forward to that being on YouTube as a resource, because a lot of times when you hear the fine-tuning argument, it's like a 10-minute thing as part of a larger stuff. But this was just on that, and I really liked it. Did you guys enjoy that?
Yeah, it was really interesting how, like, towards the beginning, he was laying out, like, what is it that physicists mean by something being random or something being ordered. It's like, to be random is just to say that you can't, like, use shorthand to sort of, like, explain it or to refer to it. You have to use the entirety of it. Like, you can't just say, oh, it's the last, or it's like the 25th through the 30th digits of pi. And that's like a pretty simple way to sort of like refer to something. And then that from there you can sort of expand outwards. But he was saying that, no, for something that's random, it's going to be like, there's no way in which to sort of like condense it down in any sort of way. And so he
talked about the Kolmogorov complexity is what that is called. And I know that because it's from computer science and information theory. So, which is my background. So I love, that was so cool how I went into all that.
Yeah, it was so cool, like getting to hear that and like his sort of connecting that to the argument from fine tuning was really interesting. Yeah, and I think it, like, Luke Barnes is sort of the king of that argument, and like all of his talks are really well worth listening to and getting a better grasp on.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually the fine-tuning argument operates kind of the same way as the teleological from evil argument. Is that I'm not sure if it did. I mean, you tell me, guys. Do you think it works as like an actual argument? as a org
Which one?
that the fine tuning, the Luke Barnes in particular. I've watched. He did a debate with Sabina Hofstetter, and then he also
Yeah.
did a debate with James Fodor. I think I watched both of those, or at least parts of
James.
both
Oh
those.
yeah.
Did anyone see those?
No,
Yes.
yeah. So it depends. I have my own. I combine. I know Swinburne's fine-tuned argument is a little complicated, but it uses Bayesian reasoning. So I combine that his version of the argument with what's his name? I forgot his name. The other, not Luke Barnes's version, but God, what's the other expert in fine-tuning?
Would you say Hugh Ross? Maybe, I don't know.
No, not Hugh Ross.
Oh,
I want to. No, I do not consider him an expert on fine-tuning. But
Okay.
what's the other? Oh yeah, I think Robin Collins, I believe. Yeah. So Robin Collins presented a discoverability argument, which I think those type of arguments are better because they avoid the self-selection principle objection, as well as, well, I mean, I don't think multiverse objection works regardless, but it's going to avoid a lot of those like objections. And then it's also, I think that a fine-tuned argument can work, but only in a Bayesian way. And you also have to make sure, in order to like avoid Oppie's objection, you're going to have to put it within some sort of explanatory framework. So you have to, like, basically you have to say, okay, why would God do this or that? Like, why would God make the parameters in this way rather than another way? And the only way you could do that is using Swinburne's framework of explanatory, his explanatory framework of basically it's just likely that God would create embodied moral agents. So he has to create a public universe. And so that universe would be fine-tuned, right? So that's the way I would go about arguing it. I think it's the only way that can successfully avoid all of the, at least most of the strongest objections. So I don't know, it's just my opinion, but but yeah.
I would have to read what like Oppie said on it again, because in general, I think it's a pretty strong argument. Sean Carroll said he thinks it's the best argument for God, though he still doesn't think it's a good one, is what he said in his interview, which was kind of funny.
Yeah,
he would say that, but he said it was the strongest. And like even that really publicized debate of Carroll with William Lane Craig, I even remember how Sean Carroll said, but my models avoid Boltzmann brains, but he never explained how it did. And so that's still my hang up. Like I can just trust Sean Carroll that somehow he designed his model to like avoid some of those issues. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it is intuitively very strong to me, I would say. I think it's a prima facie pretty strong argument. And the question is, does someone like Oppie or Sean Carroll with his model, do they really take care of all of the specificity that seems to simply be there? And maybe they do, but I personally haven't seen it there yet, but I need to dig more.
I mean, to defend Oppie, I mean, his approach, he's going to use it. I mean, I studied him for like a whole year. So what he's going to say is that he's just going to look at the total commitments, right? And so what he might argue is he might just say it's necessary that the initial conditions are that way, or he might try to argue that it's just brute fact that it's that way. And if he says it's brute fact, he might just respond to the theist by, well, on the theistic hypothesis, it's also a brute fact that God chooses the particular parameters. And so because they're both brute facts, then he would argue, well, then there's no, like, when you try to weigh it, it's not going to favor either hypothesis. So that's how he gets around it. I don't think it's successful because I think, I think we could actually better approximate the types of worlds that God creates. I also don't think that God's intentions have to be brute facts, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, so basically, I think that what you need to do is you need a Swinburnian argument and try to argue, okay, well, the probability that God would do this is pretty reasonable. And so given that, then we can most probably expect that God would create a fine-tuned universe. And if you make that argument, then I think that gets rid of Oppie's objection. And then I also think that that could provide like an inductive support for the existence of God, just by pointing out that like, hey, like any naturalistic alternative, the prior probability of like this self-selection, this generating universe mechanism playing out, selecting the fine-tuning parameters, that's just not going to be as probable as it is on theism, right? Especially if theism already predicts that there is going to be moral agents in the universe and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, my biggest problem with some of the idea of it being like necessary, just kind of randomly saying it's necessary, I just don't see how that's different than saying if we zoomed in on the human cell, and it spelled out God exists in proteins, can't we just say that just happens to be necessary? Like, I don't know, it just feels kind of arbitrary. Like, I like Dembski's idea of like specified complexity. Like, why can't we just say that's necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that you can only use necessity so far. So I'd have to think more like on that example. That would be like, yeah, that would be more difficult to respond to. But yeah.
Well, like I think at root, is there a core difference in intuitions between people who trend towards belief in God and like people who trend towards atheism? Is there some sort of core? Because you can push yourself in either direction, and how they speak to you, like in a sense, there are certain people who think the design argument is really strong because that's what it almost like they're looking at. The design is so complex and so fine-tuned that it's as if it's writing God exists. It's that plain to them. You know what I mean? That's how strongly that seems like a powerful intuition to them. That doesn't mean it's objectively speaking that powerful of a statement, but to certain people it would be. Do you see what I mean? It's like the intuition about teleological evil. That's almost meaningless to me. It's an open question, but it doesn't even register to me as anything worth considering that it could ever challenge my faith in any meaningful way, because it's like, okay, that's just an interesting question. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that made sense how I just said it.
No, yeah. It is, I think it might be the case that like people have different views on like the varying strengths of the evidences, but I mean, I know there's plenty of atheist philosophers that grant that fine-tuning is evidence for theism. They just might argue that, like the total probability just goes in the naturalist's favor. That is true. Yeah, it would still work. Although I'm not, I even as a theist, I could not be a necessitarian, so I probably wouldn't go that route. But yeah, sure. I mean, I guess it could work.
You just have to become a Calvinist. Then necessitarianism isn't a problem.
I'd rather be an atheist.
Yes. Honestly, that is true. I would rather atheism be true than Calvinism. So
yeah.
I can get on board with that potentially.
I mean, maybe if it's the Spartan theology or John Depew sort of Calvinism, then I could maybe get on board.
Or universalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Spartan theology Calvinism, is he what?
Yeah, just from John Depew. I think John Depew's technically a Calvinist, but he is a Universalist.
Oh, that's like Paul Vanderklay is technically a Calvinist, but he's like the exact opposite of anything anybody would ever think of.
Yeah.
I gotta go. I'll see you guys later. Okay?
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Santi.
Yeah.
This was great.
I actually should drop as well, guys.
Okay.
But this is super fun. So I'll catch you guys later.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Robert.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, Robert. Yeah. All right, Dry. So what do you got to say? What's your take on the whole thing? What was your...
I thought it was pretty fun. I enjoyed hanging out with people and listening to the talks. It was just really short because like I flew in around midnight Friday, so I was pretty short on sleep the whole time, but it was still, worth going to.
Yeah, it was great just being able to talk with you for seemed like both those nights were just for hours at a time, and like also having Ben Watkins there, being able to talk with him, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Ben Watkins, he's a pretty, like, if you get to know him in person, he's like a hella cool dude. Like he'll like you could easily like go out to drink, alcohol with him at a bar and like just talk for hours. So because like the first day it was kind of weird because I think it was on not Thursday. I think it was Thursday. So Thursday, he actually reached out to me on Facebook. He's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go to some live. I think I went to some theological library." And then when I got back, we picked him up and we went out to lunch. And he hanged out with me, Tim Howard, John Dunphy, and someone else named Kyle that brought us. But yeah, we were just hanging out with him for like hella long, and he was pretty cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I was
and
saying
then of course. Yeah.
The difference between his argument and Dan Barker's with Trentor was like night and day. It was so like mind-boggling, the difference between those two. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I think Ben Watkins, he was sort of like the belle of the ball for the whole crowd because like there's a lot of Christians there at the apologetics conference, and so like a lot of them sort of flocked to him, and we're just being real nice to him, helping him out, and like he was saying how he felt like this is kind of weird, like all these people, I mean, ostensibly disagree with me on like most of my philosophical positions, but are still like really nice, and I don't know, he appreciated the Christian spirit from everyone there. We're at an hour and 35 right now, Craig. I'm not sure if you want to.
Yeah, we'll go on for like 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. There was one. This is sort of off a tangent. Was there the only consciousness argument was the Josh Rasmussen one, right? Was that the only thing on philosophy of mind, even vaguely related, or?
Yeah, because they didn't do a presentation on consciousness in the conference itself. It was a breakout room. I kind of hope they would do one on consciousness because I think the argument from consciousness is very underrated. But
yeah, I think it has the most potential. I think it's really strong. We were talking about that before you got on the show, that the approach of just trying to prove the irreducibility of consciousness, sounds like that's what Josh was doing, is, that's the right approach, I think, to just present like, this, we don't necessarily have to come up with the answer, but this open question seems almost by definition miraculous. Like it can't just be reduced to material, it can't just be reduced to physical substances, consciousness.
And it was nice too that like at the end of his talk, Josh Rasmussen he was making a very modest claim. All he was saying was that like if like the atheist wants to sort of like what they should do in like dropping materialism or reductive physicalism, they should probably become a panpsychist instead, because then at least you can retain this sort of like consciousness closely tied to the physical without having sort of spooky implications, I guess, from like substance dualism or idealism.
Right.
But
totally
still having that like irreducibility of consciousness, which
that's exactly what like Emerson Green is doing, and people like Philip Goff is they're recognizing they're recognizing and acknowledging the true nature of the problem, and they're trying to solve it without becoming Christians or theists in any way, shape, or form, and staying true to what they think is right. You're becoming a bit of a. Did you know that Christian idealism is a bit of a panpsychist these days, John? So you guys are starting to.
Yep.
I've seen him talk a bit about it. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Are you going to change the channel name to Christian Panpsychism?
No, but I have my form of panpsychism is it's obviously an idealist version, but so what changed my perspective was when I realized that panpsychism is not necessarily its own view; it's more of like a meta view. So what panpsychism basically says in a nutshell is that consciousness is in all things, regardless of what the nature of consciousness is, right? So you could be a physicalist and panpsychist, you could be a dualist panpsychist, you could be an idealist panpsychist. It doesn't really matter. So I find the arguments for panpsychism convincing. So, that's basically my view now, where basically panpsychism for me is just this idea that consciousness is just in everything, right? Whatever the nature of consciousness is just in everything. Now, of course, as an idealist, I do think that consciousness is irreducible and that it is part of everything, but that's still panpsychism. So
yeah.
Now,
it's interesting. I wonder if like all idealists are technically panpsychists.
I think they would be. Yeah. I mean, at least if you're being consistent with the idealist position. So
Yeah.
Yeah, or the cosmopsychist, which is basically idealism.
Yeah.
Now the two questions I have. This is sort of unrelated, but you were on a stream once with Thomist idealism, and they never really explained. I only watched an hour or so of it, but they never really explained. They never really reconciled the two. And then dry apologist. Where are you on all these things? I've never heard you talk about philosophy of mind that much. What are you thinking on this stuff? Are you paying attention to it? Are you interested? Where are you at?
Well, I'm not as in depth on philosophy of mind, so I just give some of my views, but not a lot of like the scholarship. But I would say, yeah, I think some kind of dualism is true in the sense that I do think consciousness is immaterial. Now I recognize, like Kyle's an idealist, and I don't favor idealism, but I do think it can be defended. But yeah, I think it just seems inescapable to me that consciousness is immaterial, but I don't really like the way that sometimes the dualisms get framed, like substance dualism, and like hylomorphic dualism, if that's considered a dualism. Like, I don't have a problem with them per se, but I do think I don't know if I'm on board with how the defenders frame it. So I don't feel like I really fit in any of the positions really. But yeah, I definitely think consciousness is immaterial. But I also want to believe in a real external world. I'm not totally comfortable with idealism.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I was talking to Emerson, and I don't know. I'm still sort of thinking about this, but I'm sort of leaning now towards a sort of hylomorphic panpsychism, because I think that hylomorphism has some positives in it, in that it can explain how you can have continuity of experience despite material change. And I think that, like, if you have a sort of panpsychism that's committed to, I don't know, the individual being reductively connected to this some physical properties of some sort, then you might have some problems there. Like, if you change all the physical properties over a course of time, how is it that you have the same subject there? And so I think hylomorphism really manages to sort of like answer that problem very well. But the problem, or the shortcomings, I think that hylomorphism has, is that it doesn't answer the sort of perennial or like modern problem of consciousness right now, of the question that can be asked, like, okay, why is it that the form of the human body has something it's like to be that thing? Like, why is that the case? Especially when, like, if you're a hylomorphist that thinks that other forms don't have something it's like to be that thing. It seems like a perfectly reasonable question to ask, like, okay, why is it that humans have something it's like to be them? So that's why I think that, like, supplementing panpsychism with hylomorphic dualism or hylomorphism can be, I don't know, I at least like it right now, because it answers the problem of why is it there's something it's like to be something, because necessarily it's going to be the case that there's going to be something it's like to be something, and then also grounds continuity despite material change. But anyway, that's just something I've been thinking about.
I don't really have a lot to comment on that. I just think a difficulty with the hylomorphic position, because like I've identified with that at times, it's just I don't hold to like the hylomorphic metaphysic, and I just think it's really hard to defend. So, I mean, it would get into a longer discussion, but I think that's just going to be an issue that plagues it. So that's just kind of my initial thoughts.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. We should probably drop out. It's almost 9 o'clock here.
Yeah. You want to wrap it up? So you guys want to sign off and say goodbye and leave us with whatever you want to leave us with? Tell us what your next things are. And don't you have Graham Oppie coming on your show soon, Kyle?
Yeah, it's gonna be the 23rd. Wait, 22nd. That's 23rd his time. I get confused because he's in Australia, so he's a day ahead of me. But yeah, it's gonna be 22nd. So it'll be next week, and then of course I have my big 2-hour video coming out on October 1st. That one's gonna be. It was a pain in the ass to make it, but it was definitely worth it. So, so yeah, that's what I got going for me.
That'll be cool.
And one day, Emerson and Tarek will debate on my channel on philosophy of mind. Might
Yeah,
be in 2 years, 3 years, but it will happen.
Oh yeah, what happened with that? I was so psyched for you talking about the panpsychist illusionist. I was so excited for
Yeah.
that, and then all of a sudden I was
Well,
like,
people
34 days? What?
people just keep getting sick and things come up, and one day it'll happen.
Yeah. But there was that great debate that just happened between the two Chris's, Theist Thinker and Chris Rhodes. That's a
Yeah.
good debate.
Yeah, that was the last discussion on my channel. So
Yeah, that was good. I
thank you
watched
for
most of that.
And then as for myself, I'm still like theoretically writing a video on epistemology that I haven't really touched since the conference. But eventually it'll come out. Don't worry about it. Maybe it'll be 2 years. Like I'll release a video as soon as Emerson Green and Tarek have their debate. There we go. Setting a set date line.
There you go. So when pigs fly is
Exactly,
officially
yeah.
when it will be released.
Mark
when the
your
cows
calendars.
come home.
Yeah.
So all right, so we will close her up. This was the Capturing Christianity conference. Just some of our thoughts, and we were just hearing a little bit about it. And it was with that we will wrap her up.